I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight. I'm Jane Farrer, the Health Education Coordinator for the Wakefield Schools, and I'm welcoming you to the Substance Abuse Awareness Night for Parents, sponsored by the Wakefield High School PTSA, the Wakefield Drug and Alcohol Task Force, and the Wakefield Public Schools. Our presentation tonight will be in a panel format, and then we're going to open it to questions and answers. We have a lot of material out for you to look at. We gave you a few minutes at the beginning to look at the tables, and certainly after we're done, too. There's lots of information to take home and look at your leisure, as well as just some different displays for you to look at here tonight. Our panel for this evening, which will touch on quite a few different topics, we hope for you in substance abuse awareness and answer some of your questions. And again, feel free to ask any questions that you have in the topic area. First, we have Inspector Richard Cass from the Wakefield Police Department, Bob Blazier, who's a Wakefield parent and a pharmacist, Ann McGonigal, who's an assistant district attorney in Middlesex County and a 1984 graduate of Wakefield High School, Dr. Larry Berkowitz, a psychologist at Eastern Middlesex Human Services. He's assistant director of outpatient clinic and coordinator of the youth programs there. Next, we have Gary James, a licensed mental health counselor from Melrose Wakefield Hospital. He's also an adjustment counselor at Saugus High School. And last on our panel is Mr. Ronald Struminski, the principal of Wakefield High School. So with that, I will let the panel start, and we'll go down the row, and each person will talk about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll open it to questions.
Okay, I'm going to start with some props. These are some different instruments that you'll come across to be aware of with your kids as far as what they're using. Rolling papers for marijuana. If you come across these, very few kids roll their own cigarettes, okay? Very few people roll their own cigarettes. So if you see those, that's one indication. Pipes of all different sorts, corncob pipes all the way up to some real fancy ones, usually with like a brass type bowl with a small screen. Unlike a tobacco one, it will have a very fine screen to it. Once again, if you see this, they're probably not smoking a pipe. And then you get to the obvious ones, or what I thought was obvious. Bongs, which are water pipes. They come very fancy. This is a little bit larger one. This one here sells for about $125, so they can get very creative in some of the stuff that they use. Marijuana is a Class D substance. This is what it looks like. Sort of like oregano. It will have seeds and probably some twigs in it. It's green in color and sometimes brown in color. That's a joint that's been half smoked. I will light a marijuana cigarette in a little bit so you can get an idea of what it smells like. The next most common drug that we're running into among teens is LSD. Okay, we're running into a lot of it right now. It comes in all different forms. Most popular around right now is what they call blotter acid. It's on blotter paper, which looks sort of like graph paper. Will have all sorts of pretty designs on it. It can have anything from a unicorn, such as this, to just a purple line through it, as this stuff is. I've seen McDonald's arches. I've seen half moons. I've seen stars. Right now, pictures of green Gumbies on paper is very popular. In a few months, when LSD peaks out and you start seeing a lot of the side effects of it, people dying, things of that nature, they'll probably come out with a new form of it, and these little pills in here, the purple and the orange ones, when we arrested the people that had these, they were selling them as mescaline or THC. Anything that's small and makes you hallucinate is probably LSD. I've 19 plus years in the department, I've never come across mescaline. Many people say it's mescaline, but it's not. All it is a repackaging. LSD is a clear liquid, so they can put it on anything that they want. So, you have your cocaine, which is also very popular. Comes in different forms, different packaging materials. One popular packaging material is this little vial, brown with a black top. Sometimes they're clear, but that's usually the one that you'll find. I've never seen anything come in these vials other than drugs, okay? LSD in this one, cocaine in this one. Paper folds is probably the most common way that you'll find it. It's a piece of paper folded up, real neat, with the white powder inside of it, okay? If you see pieces of paper like that that have been folded up in a drawer, in a dresser, or in somebody's pants pockets or whatnot, that's an indication that there may be a problem. This is crack cocaine. It's white, pasty type color. It's a rock form. It's smoked, extremely addictive. Very popular among late teens or people in their early 20s, all the way up to people in their 40s, 50s. Very, very addicting. This would be a crack pipe, something as simple as this. This one here is a Light and Lavish cologne bottle. Put a hole in it, put a piece of a Bic pen in it, a little tin foil with holes in it, and they smoke it. Real simple. They can make it out of almost anything. Sometimes they get a little bit more elaborate. They go up to these. Same thing with the tin foil. If you find tin foil with holes in it, it's another indication. As far as the cocaine goes, they can get very lavish in some of their, what they use. If you're finding razor blades around, that's what they use to chop powder cocaine with. This particular kit has a little bit of everything. It has your gold razor blade. It has the mirror, which they chop the cocaine on. It's easy for them to see it and chop it. They want to make it very fine, so when they snort it, it doesn't hurt the membranes. They'll snort it with anything from something fancy like this Tudor, gold Tudor, to a cut straw, a Bic pen, a rolled up dollar bill. And this is a spoon. They'll just pick it up and snort it. So, if you run across something like this, you're running into some serious trouble. This here and this here is heroin. I know I'm going a little quickly, but we'll have time for questions afterwards. White heroin, brown heroin, it's the same stuff. This is becoming one of the most increasingly used drugs in the Wakefield area. Heroin is at an all-time low for price, same as cocaine. To give you an instance, a price reference, heroin used to sell for about $22, $24 a bag. Right now, it's selling for $6 to $8 a bag in Chelsea and Lowell. Cocaine used to sell for $2,800 an ounce back in the mid-'80s. So now you can buy it for about $600 to $800 an ounce. So prices have come way down. A lot of the kids are using it now. Heroin, very addicting. Kids think that if they snort it, rather than shooting it, they can't get addicted to it, and they can't overdose on it. That's incorrect. Our last heroin overdose in Wakefield was this year with somebody that was snorting heroin. Okay, so you can overdose from it just as easily. This is a kit, a heroin kit, from the normal way of doing heroin. You get your needle, syringe. They cook it up on a spoon they'll put a little heroin, they have some distilled water, they'll heat it up until they get into a liquid form, put it into the needle and shoot it. This is also was bleached to supposedly stop the spread of AIDS. And the last sample I have here is mushrooms. You want to pronounce them?
Psilocybin.
Psilocybin. I can never pronounce it correctly. This is another hallucinogen. It's real mushrooms taken out of cow dung and ingested, either smoked or eaten. It's a hallucinogen, has a lot of the same effects as an LSD type. And that's the different types of drugs. And do you want me to light some marijuana now, or do you want to wait until the end to do that?
Maybe at the end, so we can
Maybe
get
at the
out.
Okay.
Oklahoma's snowing.
Welcome.
I know it was quick, but
Everybody's
Explain that to your kids.
we don't have an ashtray either.
We need an ashtray. My name is Bob Blazer. I teach at Northeastern University in the Department of Cooperative Education and also in the Department of Pharmacy Practice. I also practice pharmacy at Melrose Wakefield Hospital and CVS Pharmacies. Most importantly, though, I have 3 kids in the Wakefield school system, and I've been a member of the Wakefield Drug and Alcohol Task Force for about 6 years. I've learned a lot about drug abuse education by being on the task force, and people and educators like Tom Stapleton and Jane Farah ought to be commended for the job that they've done for the children of Wakefield. I'd just like to pass along some definitions and thoughts on substance abuse to you tonight. Substance abuse is the misuse of a chemical substance causing physical, mental, or emotional damage to a person. The abused substance can be legal or it can be illegal. Most times we just think of substance abuse as involving illegal substances. Most of the time, though, they're probably legal. Examples of legal substance abuse would include alcohol, of course, nicotine, overuse of prescription tranquilizers and painkillers, overuse of over-the-counter weight loss products we see very commonly abused, overuse of cough syrups, and what we're finding a lot recently, you've probably heard about, is misuse and abuse of steroids, especially among athletes. Examples of illegal substances of abuse would include marijuana, cocaine, crack cocaine, heroin, LSD. I had mescaline on my list, but Rich says mescaline is not very popular anymore. These chemicals can be manufactured almost anywhere, in a trailer, in a bathroom, in someone's garage. These labs are very difficult to find. They can be packed up, moved on to another site very easily. The use of these drugs, it's very prevalent in our junior highs, and it's filtering down to our grade school level. Substance abuse threatens the health and lives of our children, with thousands of children being injured or killed every year due to drinking and other drug accidents. Many schools are taking a zero-tolerance attitude, and drug use will no longer be tolerated. What can we do? The first step that we can do as parents is to be drug-free. Set the example. The adage, do as I say, not as I do, no longer holds water with the kids of today. Children of today grow up at a much faster speed, and they're more aware of the world around them and its problems. They're smarter, they're brighter, and better informed. Consequently, parenting requires a much greater effort and responsibility today. Children are significantly influenced by television, movies, newspapers, magazines, and friends. I'll repeat and emphasize friends. As parents, we must communicate and listen to our children's thoughts and fears, even though that might be painful. Solutions must be offered for peer pressure, substance abuse, gang membership, sexual intimacy, and violence. This takes work and a conscious decision to communicate with your children. You have to know their friends' parents, what they're doing and who they're doing it with, and where they are. Pretending that substance abuse does not exist or can only happen to someone else's kid will not protect your child from drug abuse. Denial will only make the problem worse. We can help give our children several important things to arm them against drug abuse. First of all, the knowledge that they are special and they are loved. Always remain calm. Discuss facts without anger. Stick to the facts. Educate yourself. You're doing a good job by being here tonight. Be an active listener. What do your kids say? What do they know about drugs? Explain that drugs are not an acceptable way of life. Actions speak louder than words. Discuss free drug alternatives. Help them to become involved in drug-free activities. And empower your children to say no. Help them to build self-esteem. List ways for them so they can say no to friends who use drugs. Just in conclusion, talk to your kids, listen to your kids, know who they're with, and know where they are. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
My name's Ann McGonigal, and I'm an assistant district attorney in Middlesex County. I just spent 2 years in Lowell, about 18 months of that supervising the district court. And I've lived in Wakefield for most of my life, graduated from Wakefield High School, and after being in Lowell and seeing the drugs that are so prevalent there, crack pipes are on the street when you go to the corner, I thought Wakefield was this pristine, drug-free little community until I started working with Detective Cass and coming into Wakefield. And there is a problem, just like there is in almost every other high school at least in the county that I work in. As Detective Cass said, the increase of LSD is unbelievable in the last 5 years. We didn't see it when I was in high school. Marijuana and cocaine were the big drugs, and not even marijuana was overwhelmingly more popular than anything else. But the amount of heroin and crack we're seeing, we never saw, and a lot of that is probably due to the drop in price. What my job is after Detective Cass or any police officer arrests a student, if it's a young person, we take over prosecution of that case. And so a lot of the crimes we prosecute for are simple possession of drugs, a possession with intent to distribute drugs. If someone has a small amount of drugs or a large amount and we don't actually catch them selling, we can prosecute that the fact that they intended to sell that drug. A distribution of drugs. A lot of kids think that distribution means selling. I'll give you some cocaine, you give me money. Giving drugs to your friends is distribution. It can be prosecuted just as severely as if you sold it. A lot of hoopla has been made about the school zone charge. I don't know if that's a phrase that's familiar to you people. If you sell drugs, or if you possess drugs with the intent to sell within 1,000 feet of a school, which obviously includes a school, or within 100 feet of a park, you have to go to jail for 2 years. You have to serve the whole 2 years of that. If you're a juvenile, however, you get committed to DYS and you don't necessarily stay there for 2 years, but if you're 17 and over, you're gone for 2 years. That's selling one joint even, and I don't think a lot of young people understand that. We prosecute people for the simple possession of the paraphernalia. If they have a crack pipe and there's no drugs in it, we can prosecute that for possession of, it's called drug paraphernalia. We can also prosecute people for selling counterfeit substances. If someone sold a bag of oregano and sold it as marijuana, we can prosecute that. With the juvenile offenders, we don't try to grab every kid, throw them in jail, and that's the end of it. A lot of what we do is intervention. And if we sense there's a problem, there's an awful lot of things we can do that won't result in the child having a record. And I think some parents might be nervous about calling the police or letting people know about their child's drug use because they don't want to saddle their child with a record. There's a lot of things we can do short of that. There's a lot of dispositions and alternative dispositions we can do simply to get the child some help for the drug problem. Some of the Detective Cass told you some things to look for with regard to your child's drug use. Other things to look for is a lot of small slips of papers with numbers on them and different people's names on it. Now everyone might write a name down and throw it in your pocket. If you have 20, that's a good indication that your child might be selling drugs. Ledgers. A lot of students that are not good students run an amazingly well-organized distribution of drugs. And a lot of times they started as good students and the drugs have taken over. They still have their IQ, and that's going right into organizing the sale of drugs. If you see notebooks with a lot of names and codes, that may be an indication that there's some drug sale as well. With regard to what the schools can do, there are new regulations in order that if a child is caught with drugs on school grounds at a school event, they can be expelled, or they may be suspended, and that's the principal's discretion. There are certain things to look for and certain things that we notice in juveniles that have started with drug use and have gotten worse. Obvious things like a drop in grades, increased drinking, personality changes, a change in friends. Also increased violence. Steroids is big among the young kids, and you don't always look like a Hulk You don't necessarily have to manifest that physical change. A lot of increase in domestic violence. We see a lot of dating violence in young children now, more so than perhaps we saw several years ago, and a lot of it has to do with increased drinking and increased drug use. The last thing I want to leave you with is if you've ever heard of rave parties. I don't know if anyone's heard that term, rave parties. Rave parties are being touted as an alcohol-free time for your child. They run late into the night. They're in Worcester and Boston. We haven't seen them out here, but a lot of people are coming around to the towns trying to get a permit for a rave party. What we have discovered is there's no alcohol there. The drugs are rampant. They are absolutely, there may be some rave parties that are run well and are doing good things. What we have experienced is that there are an awful lot of drugs there. The state police are keeping their eye open to see where the next rave party may be. But if your child comes and says, hey Mom, alcohol-free, it's a good time, don't let them go. Because it's not just people smoking joints. We had some PCP at a party out near Holliston, which was something that no one had seen in that area for years. But our job is to work very closely with the police, and also we've worked very closely with the schools, too, to talk about the kids that are having the problems and see if we can intervene before they come to me as an adult. And at that point, there's not a heck of a lot we can do. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, now that you're all sufficiently anxious, I guess I can address a little bit the sort of perspective from the point of a counselor. I'm Larry Berkowitz. I work at Eastern Middlesex Human Services here in Wakefield. We run both a clinic that works with adolescents and adults, as well as prevention programming in a lot of the schools around here. A number of years ago, many years ago, before I had my own children, somebody once said to me that something that stuck with me for a lot of years, that there are two incredibly powerful and important jobs that parents have. The first is teaching your children all the values, all the skills, all the sort of day-to-day information that they will need to become successful people living in our society. And the second, and incredibly much more difficult task of a parent, is learning to trust that your children have accepted those values and letting them go off to live as young adults and adults. And as parents of adolescents and young adolescents, I assume most of you have teenagers, and that's why you're here. You're in this incredibly difficult, awkward position that's somewhere right in between those two sort of pieces of development as a parent and where your child is. It's an incredible challenge. It's not easy for any of us, and it's getting scarier as we hear about all the potential harm that is out there. I think it's really terrifying for parents. What can you do as parents? Well, I certainly agree, and will echo some of the things you've already heard. One of the most important things you can do is educate yourself. You're here, and that's a good sign. And certainly starting to educate yourself early, when your children are early on, if you still have younger kids, I would encourage people to talk with their kids about what you're learning. Ask them what they're learning. What do they know about drugs? Communication with kids, with teens and young children, is probably the most important protective factor you can have. If you can start to develop, even early on, it's never too late, a relationship in which you can talk with your children and your teenagers, and they feel that they can talk to you, you will probably build in something that's much more sort of protective and valuable than anything you could add later on. The ability to talk with your kids, to share your values, to let them clearly know what you believe, what you value, what's important to you, without necessarily condemning them for what they believe, is a very important parenting skill and preventive factor. So talking, increasing communication, making sure that kids know what your values are, but equally as important, listening too. Finding time, that gets harder and harder. I was just talking with a family earlier today that had an 18-year-old, and I was talking about trying to build in time, like for discussion, and they laughed at me. And they said, that's very entertaining, You try to talk to someone, a teenager at 7 o'clock in the morning, because that's the only time we see him. He's out the door, and we don't see him until 11:30 again at night. But listening is equally important. That's the one major complaint. I don't know if other people hear that, but I hear that from teenagers all the time. my parents just don't listen. They don't know. They don't care. And that's a hard one to do, too, because if we start asking our kids questions about, oh, what were you doing today? They think, see, you're always checking up on me. They will sort of accuse you right away of not trusting them, of trying to get at the nitty-gritty details. So part of the trick is also trying to find ways to listen, times and places to listen. It's often better to do it when you're in the car. Have you ever noticed that? There's something about a car. Kids will talk more in a car than they will if you're sitting down and asking them a question, or around other activities, or even leaving them a note about something, or asking, gee, you know, something came up, I just saw a show, you know, or went to this talk last night on drugs and stuff, I'd love to talk with you about that. When would be a good time? You know, sort of putting a little bit of the control in their court, but making a point of listening, hearing what they have to say, and sometimes just sitting with their answer. What I'm talking about here is opening up an avenue for communication so that you can express your opinions and values, and so that we can start to hear what they have to say, particularly if there is a problem brewing. You will have a better chance of knowing that, I believe, as well as looking for sort of evidence around the home and in pockets and in the laundry. If your teenagers and young teenagers really believe that they can come and talk to you, you probably have a better chance of them asking you questions early on in the point where they may be just thinking about drug use or considering drug use than when it's become a problem. I bring up the issue of drug use. I want to say something about that. When we look at using alcohol or drugs from sort of a social and emotional point of view, we sort of have a slightly different criteria of thinking about it than perhaps from a legal aspect. And many parents, we often sort of think of there's abstinence and then there's drug abuse. That it's one or the other. And there's really a whole continuum that we look at in looking at from sort of a drug treatment approach or a social and emotional approach, and certainly one end of the spectrum is abstinence. And for many people, parents, we might hope that that's where our children will remain. The reality is, given the current culture, there's probably going to be a lot of experimentation. All the studies and statistics show, particularly through high school, I'm sure others here can correct me, that 50 to 60% of high school students will have said that they would have smoked marijuana within the last, I think it's a month or 4 weeks or something on the studies. So there is a lot of experimentation going on, and that's clear. We know that. There's also social use among teenagers of drugs and alcohol, much in the same way many of us as adults will drink socially when we get together with friends, maybe a few times a month, just occasionally. And that is, well, it may not be something we would value or want to see. It's sort of a different kettle of fish than someone who's using every single day, who's getting into regular use. You can see there's sort of a progression that we're looking at here. And not all kids will follow this progression. Some will just experiment and never use again. Some will use socially and go on to continue, like maybe drinking socially as adults. Some kids, however, will go on until where it becomes a problem, and that's where we'll probably start to see more of the behavioral indicators that you folks have talked about. Kids who are lethargic or withdrawing, grades drop. Well, also, last year, just this past week, someone came in and told me last year their child was getting all B's and C's, and this year they're getting D's and F, and the kid's blaming all the teachers. It's the teachers' faults. They have bad, awful teachers this year. They're externalizing the blame. Usually that's another sign to look for. Everything's everybody else's problem. Certainly one thing that a lot of people have talked about, too, is just sort of the kids who will avoid their parents. They'll try to avoid you when they're high or stoned. Interesting, I don't know if you saw one of the handouts there lists different drugs and the amount of time that the effects last. Interestingly. So I met a family recently whose son had been taking acid LSD for quite a while, and they had no clue. What was happening was he would leave the house in the morning and use, and after school he would go off to a friend's house, and he was smart enough not to come home until the effects were not nearly as visible. Avoiding eye contact with parents, or just sort of sulking, becoming more angry. Those are all some of the behavioral indicators, and that's what you'll see when there's more regular use occurring. That's also when we start running into risk of addiction and dependence on drugs around that point. Certainly after that will become problem use and dependency, and that's usually when it's time to turn for help to someone. Fortunately in our area there are a lot of wonderful resources. We have the clinic here in Wakefield, the hospital in Melrose, a lot of private counselors in the area. A lot of good resources in this area, funding from the state, from the Department of Public Health, that will enable people to access services without insurance, even if that's a problem. So it's a difficult challenge. It's scary, but I think the best thing you can do is educate yourselves, communicate. Just keep communicating from day one. Be clear in your limits. Be clear in your values, and ultimately, we all have to come to accept the very difficult fact that our kids, as they get older and older, will really start making decisions for themselves. And they're going to have to bear the consequences of those. Hopefully, we can help them by giving them all the values and the information that they will need to make good choices, to make careful choices. When it seems that they haven't, often the best thing we can do is try to get them the help they need.
Thank you. I'm sort of going to dovetail what everyone else has talked about. One of the things, though, too, as a parent, and I do have a 16-year-old son at this point, so I certainly understand. He sort of encouraged me this week. He's a track star, or so he thinks. And he was invited to go drinking over this past weekend with the team. And he said no. And that was clearly his choice. And the other person who asked him said, well, were your parents going to get mad? And he just sort of looked at him. And Matt's only a sophomore, and just sort of looked at him and said, no, I just don't like to do it. And just sort of left. But felt good about that decision. I'm proud of him this time. What it's going to be like in the future, I don't know. Unfortunately, it's very tough out there. As Jane said in the introduction, I have sort of two roles. Not only am I a therapist at Morris Wakefield, but I also am the school adjustment counselor in the Southern school system, and I work with both middle and high school kids. There is drug use. Trust me, there is drug use. I was surprised, too, that you were talking, a lot of our kids now are getting into the Valiums, Klonopins, Xanax, pills they love. There's a lot of that out there.
Amoxicillin.
Yeah.
I had a couple kids refer to me recently taking amoxicillin.
Amoxicillin.
Their ears are going to be great.
There's a lot of that use.
A lot of Ritalin also.
Yeah. Or Dexedrine, which people are using. Dexedrine is speed, and thought to help people with attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity, but it's also speed. So it's out there. I have middle school kids using, and I have middle school kids using weekly. Scary. And basically what I spend a lot of time on, too, is talking to parents about their own history. When we were growing up, one of the things we didn't do was talk about the people who drank. And I really believe you have to be honest. If there are histories of alcohol or drug use or abuse in your family, you need to let your kids know. Unfortunately, they are, and they do become more susceptible. You need to be honest with that. I've had so many kids not have a clue that there are problems in the family because we hide it. We, in my generation, were taught you hid that stuff. You didn't talk about it. It was nobody's business. It was crazy. But you need to be comfortable with that. The other thing I talk about, too, is the fact that alcohol and drug use is not the only addiction out there with our kids. The fastest growing addiction out there right now for kids is gambling. The kids are spending millions and millions on gambling. I have a kid right now that's spending between $75 and $100 a week on cards. He's his graduating senior this year. There are relationship addictions. I just spent the time before I came here working with a new client who not only is he hooked on alcohol and drugs, steroids, and many other things, but he's also hooked on his girlfriend to the point where it's very serious. He probably could be a stalker if it gets too much farther. That's out there, guys. You gotta know it's out there. There is battering out there. Kids are very physical with one another. It's scary. It is very scary. I really support SAD too as a way of contract writing with kids. Is there a SAD chapter here at the school? SAD is Students Against Drunk
There
Driving.
was a chapter here at one time. They ran into some difficulty, as you know.
Okay.
Philosophical.
But even just talking to your kids about a contract, don't let your kids drive while they're under the influence. I lost a brother because of that 3 years ago. He was killed by a drunk driver going to work in the morning. It's out there. And if just, saying to your kids, understanding they're probably going to drink, but have the contract that you will be available to them, you'll pick them up anywhere, at any time. You don't want them driving while they're under the influence. Because unfortunately, our kids don't think anything is ever, ever, ever going to happen to them. And that's what they believe in. That's how they function. We're getting into prom season. We had our junior-senior FOMO last weekend. I can guarantee you there was use and abuse. I can guarantee you. I heard stories already today about what happened. That's going to happen. Be aware of it. Thanks.
You notice how clever Jane Farrar is in the order that she sat us here tonight? I mean, we just took seats. We didn't... wonderful ordering, Jane. Fabulous. I'm Ron Strumensky. I'm the principal of Wakefield High School. And I'm the newcomer in the group here. I've been here about a year and a half. And this is really my first contact with a small town experience in terms of schools. I came out of the Boston school system, which I don't need to tell you what my experiences may have been like there, and out of Attleboro, which is a city of 38,000 and much more diverse and, I'm not going to say more sophisticated, certainly not, but certainly more sophisticated when it came to drug use and abuse and the kinds of things that I've dealt with prior to coming here over a 31-year period. And so I want to share with you a couple of things. One is a story that I'm fond of telling whenever I participate in a discussion like this that happened to me in 1971 with a student and his parents. This gentleman happened to be an executive, an intact family, had a son who was a sophomore in the high school at the time that I was assistant principal in 1971. I called the parents in because I suspected that this young man was dabbling in something. Even though I couldn't be sure, I sensed something was wrong, and I called both of them in, and they were right there, Johnny, on the spot, and I shared with them my thoughts, hoping that they, in fact, would become somewhat vigilant and take my advice. And what I got in 1971 was, are you accusing our son of taking drugs? Now, you must be out of your mind. Our son would not be taking drugs, as if to say, we're a prominent family. In fact, we're a fairly wealthy family. And that doesn't happen in families like ours. That was a Wednesday. I remember it because on Saturday, the young man OD'd, climbed out of his bedroom window, shimmied across a limb on the tree, fell down, broke both legs, his collarbone, and his arm. And when they rushed him to the hospital and the parents went in, they were told that the young man had overdosed on drugs. And so it was that they were at my office Monday morning before I was, very contrite and very apologetic that they had treated me in that manner and that they hadn't listened. You know, we always hear about alcohol, and when we see the advertising, we see black and white and green and yellow and old and young and rich and poor. And I've seen lots of intact families suffer from this problem. Another family I remember very well is a family that had 4 children in high school at the same time, 1 in each grade, which is somewhat unusual. They were very prolific, obviously. But the senior in the family was one of the top 10 students in the school and ended up in MIT. The junior was a boy who was a drug addict, an alcoholic, and dropout. The sophomore girl was your average C plus, B minus student, happy-go-lucky, socially accepted, did a nice job. And the freshman had learning disabilities. 4 in the same household, an intact family of people who loved their children and brought them all up the same way. I suppose we could sit here, Larry, maybe and talk about the second child, couldn't keep up with the boy who's the scholar, and there may be some truth to that. But the fact of the matter is if you have more than one child, you're in a situation where either the older one is doing a little better, getting more attention, etc., and there are all sorts of reasons, not the least of which is who one hangs around with, that leads to getting involved in the experimentation, which then can lead to other kinds of things. I remember meeting the chief of police here in Wakefield when I arrived, and I came to Wakefield before the interview process. I had been invited to come to interview, and I had never been here in my life. I didn't know where it was, and I came here on a Sunday, and I went down to the lake, thinking that I could meet some people and find out something about Wakefield. And it was a nice day. And I went looking for people, and I went over and introduced myself, and I had a hard time finding anyone who lived in Wakefield sitting at the lake reading their Sunday newspapers. There were people from Malden and North Reading and Linfield and everywhere else. The second thing I did was I got as many newspapers as I could and gathered them up and started to read. And I was particularly also interested in reading the police responses in Wakefield and what was going on. And it was then shortly after that that I met the chief of police, and I said to him I was a little concerned about coming here because there was so much police activity. And he hastened to remind me that I should go back and read those newspapers and find out how many of those people came from out of town, which led me to start thinking about my visit to the lake. And he reminded me that because there are so many highways and byways that cross over and pass near Wakefield, that there's an awful lot of things going on and a possibility that things can easily be transported here. And so it is that now I've read that taxi cabs are transporting drugs and problems and things. And so Wakefield is sort of at the crossroads of the transportation system. It's easily accessible to people who can jump off of the highway, come down Route 1 and get off and get here, come up 128. And most places that have accessibility like that are going to experience the kinds of problems that we're talking about. Attleboro, where I come from, where I was an administrator, is also right on Route 95. We had similar problems, but I didn't link them together when I was throwing some stones at Wakefield. But I was throwing legitimate stones at Wakefield at the time and not realizing it. Because when I got here, I found out that, and I wasn't surprised, I've been dealing with kids who have been experimenting and selling joints and giving them away in a cafeteria for years and years and years. And I began to sense that we had a problem here. And we talked tonight, someone mentioned the word zero tolerance in terms of drugs. And nothing ever will succeed that bends to any kind of utilization of drugs. And it will never happen that we will bend in Wakefield High School. And so it was that last year the chief and I drafted a compact of understanding where we would share information so that if things happen on a weekend in Wakefield and the police feel it has a chance of spilling over into the school, they'll get in touch with us and say, look, we had this happen. There's a chance that this could spill over. There was a party in town. We picked up some people with some drugs that may be out there. On the same token, we will get in touch with them if we think something will happen overnight or over the weekend because we have a sense that something is brewing in school. And it was that communication that brought about our ferreting out, as you know, 3 people from this school this year. Now, under educational reform in 1993, finally, because for years as an administrator, people were saying to me, you have the responsibility to take care of all of these problems. But what was missing was the authority to deal with them. And as has been mentioned tonight, for the first time now, as principal of the high school, all principals of all high schools in Massachusetts have now not only the responsibility to maintain among many other things, a drug-free environment, but that when we come in contact with and apprehend those in possession or who are selling or giving away drugs, I now have the ability to put them out of school. And I've done that. I did it last year. You probably don't even know that. It's not something we necessarily go ahead and broadcast. And as you know, I've had several occasions this year to do just that right here in Wakefield. There was also a young lady this year in the high school who went into the medicine cabinet at her home, took a quantity of drugs out of the medicine cabinet and distributed it in school, resulting in an overdose of another young lady who was somewhat depressed and looking for whatever she could get. This girl supplied her, and we had to take her out in an emergency vehicle. What are some of the things that I've seen in working with parents who have children who have been through this, and having sat with them in groups and trying to help other people and other parents in the past? I think the most difficult part of all of the things that I've seen over the years is a single 6-letter word called denial. What that means is that if you find something or you suspect something, the answer is invariably going to be, honest to God, Ma, I don't do that.
Not mine.
Not me. I don't do that. Even when they're up to here and stagger into the house and you know damn well they're doing that. No, I didn't have anything. I didn't have anything. I can recall the night the police chief went on vacation and his daughter had a party at her house for 6 kids. And 60 turned up. And it really got out of hand, and the chief of police's house got trashed. There was drinking and drugging, and it was awfully embarrassing for the chief. Because the word got out that parents were away. It was party time. And it was embarrassing for him until it happened to the administrator of the high school, when he went away to the Cape for a few days and told his son no parties. And I drove into my garage, and my wife said, "Isn't that our toilet?" It was hard to tell because it was in many, many pieces. And sure enough, there was a party in the high school administrator's house, and they had been drinking, and I had been assured in the same manner of the denial that I'm talking about, "Not me, Dad, we're not going to have any parties." And we had a party, and we had drinking, and who knows what else. I wasn't there. But I do know that one of them broke my toilet. And I said to my wife, "That's not our toilet." No. She went into the bathroom and said, "Hey, look." And sure enough, the new toilet wasn't as big as the old one. And that was really the tip-off. That really was the commode in the garage. That's a true story. The moral of the story is that the hardest thing to deal with the teenagers is that they lie. Nice family, huh? You brought them up, you go to church, you tell the truth, they lie. They lie.
Never go away.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm going to tell you something. You're laughing. I never went away again. I had to make the sacrifice. As good a student as he was, good kid, he was a teenager, and he was susceptible to all of those things. So I didn't. I made the sacrifice. When he had that party, he was a sophomore. For the next 2 years, we did not go away. That's the end. That's exactly right. And second, and I love this. I mean, if you don't, make sure you get a copy of this. I hope there are enough to go around, because the things that are in here are absolutely the truth. And among those young people who spent many, many months in groups that I worked with, they would tell you that all of these things are true about those people who use. And what parents have told me, and I'm sure have told people here, they don't want to see you, so sometimes they don't come home. I'm sleeping over Johnny's house tonight. Sometimes the reason they're sleeping over Johnny's house is because they don't want you to see them, and maybe they're going to go in late enough and Johnny's parents will be sleeping, and in fact they'll sleep it off and everything will be fine in the morning. Or if they take something, or if they're into something, when they walk in the door of the house, they don't even talk to you, they go right to their room, and they close the door. That's a tip-off in itself. Antisocial behavior, grades, I've seen it 1,000 times. Students doing A-B work, first term, second term, all of a sudden he's doing C's and D's and F's. How come? Is it an accident? It's not an accident. There's something there to be vigilant about. I always tell parents, you say, what do you do about it? I say, they live in your house, you make it your business to know what's going on in their room. A little room search doesn't hurt. The kinds of things you see over there, the rolling papers, the marijuana in little cello bags, are hidden away. And you know what? When parents find those, they fall apart. I'm going to tell you that. If you go home and find one and you don't expect it to be there, you absolutely, I've seen parents come in, what should I do? Oh, my God. And they fall apart. Because I can't believe they found that under the books, up on top of the shelf, behind the scarf, in the corner, where you would never look in 1,000 years, Mom.
You're inventive, trust me.
Absolutely. Absolutely inventive. I've heard somebody say tonight, I think earlier on, when they say to you, I'm going to sleep at Joan's house, call up the parent and find out if they really are. It's imperative. Because the chances are, Joe's parents have gone down the Cape like I did. And you don't know that. And you're not going to know it unless you call to find out. And it doesn't hurt, you know. You're always the one. You see, the problem for parents, and I have 2 boys, they're now grown, but I've been through all of that too. What do you mean you're going to call Jack's father up? Come on, I'm just going to stay over there tonight. Well, I want to know if Jack's father's there. Come on, Dad. Hello? Is your dad there? No, he's not home. He's not home. It's all part of what we started with, the denial issue. Now, sometimes they tell you a little bit of the truth, and they leave something out. That way they don't lie to you. We experience that in school all the time. Did you do that? Well, she sent me out. It wasn't my fault. This issue of projecting blame on everybody else, major tip-off. Not me. Somebody else did it. All important issues, this whole list of things, the highs and the lows, not getting up in the morning, the marijuana, the kids who smoke marijuana. If I look at my toddy list, I'm not going to tell you that every kid who's toddy is smoking marijuana, but if I were looking for some kids who were smoking marijuana, I'd go to the list of the chronic toddy kids, because they can't get up in the morning, because that's what marijuana does to them.
The other thing is coming home after being out and having unbelievable appetites, like more than usual.
Or
Call them
thirst,
munchies.
also.
They have munchies. They'll eat you out of house and home. That's, again, a very classic sign.
It's a tough one, because many teenagers will.
Right, right.
I've always been told by the parents that once they found out that they were doing it, they used to drink an exorbitant amount of soft drinks. That they come in and they could drink 2 and 3 cans of soda, for example. I don't know pharmaceutically what that's about. Is there some reason for that?
Dryness of the mouth,
Yeah.
membranes, yeah,
Okay.
definitely side effects.
So if you're buying 2 cases of soda a week, you probably want to take a look at that. Not if you have 4 or 5 kids, that's okay, but if you've got 1, that could be a problem.
Somebody asked tell us what we should do. And I think the most important thing to do, right off the get-go, is if your kids are out, and when they come home at night, there should be an adult waiting for them. You don't have to give them field sobriety tests, but you should have a conversation with them. And don't be afraid to get in their face. If they have a big wad of big red gum in their mouth, that's a sign, okay? Binoca, Visine, perfume, okay? They go out normal, they come back and they smell like, a half gallon of cologne, okay? They're doing that for a reason, okay? Marijuana has a distinct odor, it will stay on the body and on the clothes. Alcohol, obviously. Find out what their speech is like. Just talk to them. I mean, they always give you the thing, well, what, don't you trust me? Well, no, there's a difference between not trusting and being a parent. Okay? I mean, you are responsible for them. So,
Another big tip-off, of course, is the dilation of the eyes. and you look at them and their eyes are big time dilated. That just doesn't happen normally. Probably happens if they've got a bad cold, might be on something, but for the most part, our kids are healthy most of the year. But they walk in and their eyes are a little glassy and their eyes are dilated, chances are they've taken something. And it's worthy of pressing the issue and not ignoring it. I think that's the other part. What about handling experimentation?
Well, actually, I wanted to respond a little bit to the question, what do we do, how do we know? There's actually been some very exciting research in the last few years about resiliency in teenagers and adolescents. And that has looked at what are sort of the protective factors, the kinds of things that might be considered protective factors, or in this study they were called developmental assets in the lives of young people, that might help sort of reduce risk-taking behaviors. And in this study they looked at premature sexual behavior, drug use, alcohol use, violent behavior, just a whole list of things. And actually have identified anywhere from 30 to 40 of these sort of developmental assets. And we could probably sit here and generate them ourselves. It's common sense, but the research and literature has borne this out. And some of it is at the family level, some of it is at the community level. There are a lot of things that we can do. Helping our kids to be very much involved in activities. From the start. Of course, you don't want to overprogram our kids. We hear people like David Elkind on the other end telling us we're keeping our kids too busy and then they're exhausted. But kids who are involved in sports and plays and helping them find something that they're good at, that they enjoy, that they can feel good about, they can be connected to. The church, the synagogue, the civic groups. Finding places where kids can feel plugged in, they can feel part of the community. Also helping just to foster a sense of community in your neighborhood. I was sitting here thinking, oh God, am I going to have to stay home for the rest of my, for the next 10 years or something? I can't do that. It's bad enough now. But
You bring grandma over.
if I know all the people on my street and all the people on my street know my kid on a first name basis, they're going to be a little bit more aware. And I will feel comfortable then if I go out and say to the Frumpkins next door, listen, we're going away for the weekend. Keep an eye on the place. John's going to be here. Or my sister-in-law who lives on the other side of town. I might say, look, I'll make you a deal. When we're out for the night or away for the weekend, I want you to come drive by the house. I'll do the same for you. And if you see a couple of cars or a lot of lights on or something, knock on the door. Or let me know as soon as I come home, or here's the number where I'm going to be. Call me. I think we can use our community in that way, in just the same way that you would want to know the parents of some of the kids that your kids are spending a lot of time with. So trying to help kids be connected to things, helping them feel they're part of the community, being part of the community yourselves, being actively involved. Those are all some of the things. I could give you a whole list, but those are some of the kinds of things that help. Being involved, actually, this is often true earlier on, being involved in kids' schools. Being more a part of that, so that you know the administrators, you know the teachers. So there's more of a sense then, in a way, for kids, that they and their family are connected and plugged in with all these people in these institutions. If it's a little harder. You don't come into the high school, and chat with the teachers like you did when your children were in elementary school.
As much as we would encourage that, they don't want you to do that.
Right,
They don't want you seen around the school.
But when you come to
This
things like
age.
this, you say, you've been
Right.
here, you've talked with our principal, and, it'll mean a little something different to them, I think, if they know they're walking past your office stoned, and their mom and dad.
I just want to add a couple of things, and then maybe we can take some questions from you. We've talked a lot about drugs, but among teenagers, it wouldn't surprise you to know that alcohol is still our number one enemy. And that the kids, especially on weekends, can't have a good time unless they have a beer in their hand and their elbow is bent, and that's just the way it is. It doesn't help to see all of the encouragement in the media that kids get. I mean, they watch sports. It's invariably, Coors and Budweiser and all the others that, as much as I think they doth protest too much in some of the things they say to defend themselves, but beer is how it starts, invariably, and interestingly, and Jane could share some of this, I never realized until maybe about 10 years ago that the younger you are, the more easily one can become an alcoholic. And the same amount of alcohol that a 13-year-old drinks, you know, an 18-year-old could drink and not become an alcoholic, and a 30-year-old could drink and be further away from being an alcoholic. But for years and years and years, I used to take into the high school I came from at least a handful of alcoholics at 13 and 14. When they came to the high school, they came with records that indicated they were already alcoholics.
Along
Already. They had begun when they were 9 and 10 years old, getting into the liquor cabinets in their own homes or at the home of their friends. And it doesn't take long at that age to acquire the addiction. And it's the furthest thing from a parent's mind that could be going on. As hard as it is to believe, when I've talked to the parents of those kids coming in, when I would read the record and call them in the summer and say, come on in, let's talk, I want to, get to know you and your family, and they would say to me, honest to God, Mr. Straminsky, I had no idea. He told me he started drinking when he was 8 years old. Now he's 14 years old. He's been drinking for 6 years. He's an alcoholic. They had no idea he was drinking, which leads me to, if you have a liquor cabinet, you should be checking it. You should know what the levels are in that liquor cabinet. I had a young man who one time drained every bottle in his house and replaced it with water, and the parents never knew because they were social drinkers, and they very rarely. It was there for years and years and years, they told me, and so they hardly ever went to the liquor cabinet at all. And don't you think that the son knew that? And he drained every one of them before they found out. Because he knew they didn't drink that much, and yet they always wanted to have something in the house in case somebody came in. You probably are in that situation. I mean, most of us have something there for now and then. It's not a crime, but it's bad for young people, and they'll find it. Just like we talked about the medications with the young lady this year. God knows, I'll tell you, if you've got some things in your medicine cabinet, and you know how we all accumulate them for years before you throw them, go home tonight and throw them out. Especially the painkillers.
Ron, you brought several good points that sparked thoughts for me too, but the models, Bob said, the ways in which we use things. If we come home and say things like, oh God, I've had a killer day. Have me a beer, would you? Or I need a drink. This is such an awful day. Or so. The messages we give, we have to be very aware of.
Or we have a headache, I need a Fiorinol.
Right.
The message is that we're taking something to relieve
It's a
something,
quick
and that's
fix.
what you do, a quick fix. Drug.
Well, I'm hearing a lot of things tonight. One is that we need continued education, and through health grants, we're always offering parental workshops, and if people have needs in specific areas. I've heard several times tonight teen dating violence. We're going to be offering a parent panel on teen dating violence this spring, and the Center for Addictive Behaviors supplied a lot of that material on the table tonight, and they're available to do parent workshops, and we've done them in the past, and we're more than willing to do more in the future, as well as, again, with the curriculum that we have in the schools and getting that even stronger. I'm hearing a lot about communication within families and with parents and all of those kinds of things. I'm hearing about a lot of great community resources, all of the people up here. If you have questions or things you need to discuss, the police department, the district attorney's office, the hospital, Eastern Middlesex Human Services, the school administration, school nurses, and the health teachers and professionals that are in the schools are all here to answer your questions and provide you with information. As far as community getting involved, the Wakefield Drug and Alcohol Task Force has been in existence probably for about 12 years. We're always looking for people to join on. We work on prevention as our primary focus, how do we prevent substance abuse in our community. One thing we've overlooked a little bit tonight, I know, again, we call it one of the gateway drugs, but it's tobacco. And Pat Cingariello is here tonight, our new tobacco control specialist from the Board of Health. We're trying to get cessation programs into the schools and the community. I mean, that's one thing we haven't really discussed, but nicotine, it's a drug, it's an addiction for a lot of people. It's obviously serious health ramifications. She has a lot of brochures over there for you to take a look at as well, and certainly to call Pat at Board of Health or myself. We can give you more information on tobacco abuse and cessation programs and any other information that you might want on that. The Drug and Alcohol Task Force has done lots of information nights. We published, and Mr. Straminsky referred to it a few years ago. We've done a couple of them over the last 10 years, parent information brochures, and we're working on a new one to come out again in the fall to give parents good information, current statistics. We're doing more surveying this year for our grants, but we'll have some current statistics for Wakefield as well as the Massachusetts statistics and national statistics as well. Drug abuse is on the rise again, even with all our programs. Again, the media influence and society and stresses on kids today. A lot of things have influences on that. So we have some of these, and these are the kinds of things the task force does, getting out information to people, holding educational forums. We've begun to discuss the Safe Homes program. Our neighboring communities of Linfield and Reading have Safe Homes programs up and running. Again, a published booklet of parents who've signed on to make their homes a safe place for kids to go. And that networking amongst parents, but it needs to start at a grassroots group like this. Like, we think this is important. I've had lots of concerns about what's happening in homes, what happens when parents aren't home, that calling other parents just to make sure they're going to be home, that you know the parents of your kids' friends. I mean, it's kind of common sense information, but we need to keep hearing that and keep reinforcing that to people. So, you know, Safe Homes is something we'll continue to look at. We invite people to join our group and help us to work on these prevention activities that we're involved in at this point. Any other questions for the panel? I invite you to keep looking around after at the things we have available.
Jane, I'd just like to make one comment. I know tonight everyone here is, a lot of people are probably saying, oh my God, especially if their kids aren't at the high school. I think that we all should know that there are lots of children who are not involved in this type of thing. And through the Drug and Alcohol Task Force, Jane and some other people and myself have gone to some meetings where they're trying to start in elementary school all the way up drug-free clubs. And not that everything that they would do in this type of a club would be to promote being drug-free. You're a member of a club that's drug-free, but you do all other type of activities. And the emphasis was on the positive, that you have to make the kids that don't partake in these feel good about it and not hide it as a secret. So I think if more activities outside of school could be organized for the kids that don't want to do this, that they only do it because there's nothing else to do. I think that's a positive thing to go around. Are we getting...
For the peer pressure in a positive way. Reading has a program, Athletes for Healthy Lifestyle Choices, and that's a group of kids who practice healthy choices, and to get a group going in that respect and make it a positive thing to do. Or did we wait our...
Yeah, we let it.
Finale. Does anyone else have any questions for the panel? Again, these people are resources for you at any time, and myself here at school if you have more questions.
I have a question for Mr. Stravinsky. We had quite a lively PTSA meeting the other evening, and I forget, was it Mr. O'Leary? Was the representative? Okay. Quite a few parents raised the issue that when they've been either dropping off or picking up their students right in front of the building, apparently even though it's completely against state laws and town laws and everything, they have noticed, and a few of them brought up the fact that it seems like whether it's out the front door or the back door of the school, the minute they get out there, it's blatantly in front of everybody else going for cigarettes. And as Mr. O'Leary correctly pointed out, I mean, it takes a certain number of people to be out there supervising naturally, and you can't be everywhere all at once. And one parent at the PTSA meeting kind of brought up the idea, something to think about, would it be possible to either have other faculty members volunteer for a certain duty after school or before school, have more adults right out there. I know a few of you who were at that meeting the other night. I didn't even know the lady who raised a lot of the issues, but a lot of them seem to be in agreement that some of the kids are almost poking fun at the whole idea of not being able to
It's
smoke.
already been done. Mr. O'Leary reported it.
Oh, after the, oh, good, great. Well,
Because
thank
the smokers, and the smokers, it's pretty much leveled off at about, in our surveys, about 18% of the high school students smoke, which is less than 1 out of 5. But that's still too many, and we'd obviously like to get that down. I think my own feeling is if we don't teach them anything else and we can get them off an addiction, we've done them a tremendous service.
Right.
And we've talked often about pouring them in, so they're not supposed to. Some of these kids, it's hard for them to get through the day. If you've ever been addicted to cigarette smoking, I have. When I was smoking, I don't know if I didn't smoke in school, but when I got to college, I started to smoke. I often think, could I have gotten through the day? And I don't think I could have. And when these kids get out, that's the first thing that they, it's on their mind, especially in the last class. Doesn't make it right, it's wrong. I picked it up myself out front today, so I know what you're talking about.
No, well, thank you for
Yes.
addressing.
As part of the grant money that we have, kids that are picked up with tobacco products or smoking, there's a tobacco education class that they attend after school as part of the consequence for that. We've had about 40 kids so far this year that have gone to the after-school class. And then for drugs and alcohol, again, if you're caught on school property, as well as some of the kids that are picked up outside, it goes through the court and through the DA's office. We have an after-school session that Mr. Smith runs, an educational class, similar to a drug driving school you'd go to if you were picked up in the community, that kids need to attend as well in that first offense. So we are dealing with them educational ways as well as disciplinary action that's taken.
You
And
don't hear a
working
lot
with the
about that
courts and the
outside,
DA's office.
because people don't advertise that, I gotta go to drug school, or I gotta go to
Right.
tobacco school.
Right.
They keep that quiet, so.
The kids don't know about it. They don't know.
You'd be surprised how many that they don't know.
They don't know that that's a consequence. Well, they know. Well, it's in the handbook. I mean, the kids are encouraged, parents as well, to read the handbook, and it is.
Kids who never break rules don't know what's in the handbook. You see, we only publish that for 5% of the population. The rest of them put it in their locker, they go to their classrooms. They don't smoke in the lab, they don't cut class, they don't stay out of school when they're not supposed to, so they could care less.
And as, it was pointed out at another one of our task force meetings, it was so true too, the police officer who came in here undercover, within 5 minutes or whatever, the student who he came in contact with knew what parts of the handbook to show him, because like as you said, the students who are interested in those certain sections know exactly which ones to go around and get into.
Let it not go, I keep hearing that within 5 minutes, it wasn't an accident that he came in touch. We knew
Oh, no,
who the
no,
suspects
that's
were,
what
we
you
put
did,
him in
yeah.
touch with those people. So, part of the problem that came out of this episode was that it appeared that you could almost sit next to any student in this school and buy something. That's not the case. But there's enough of it there that I was concerned enough, and we worked together to ferret some of those people out. I mean, he sat next to him because we sort of sent them in that direction, if the truth be known. All right? But we also put him in classes where we thought we had our best shot, and we were right.
No, we
It
didn't
wasn't an
know that.
accident, that's what I'm saying.
We were told that
Right.
it wasn't an accident.
Right.
And the only other question we have to raise, when you brought up the idea of steroids, when you mentioned about the whole idea of steroids and athletes and wanting to build bigger bodies and everything, did you have samples of steroids there?
No, I
or
didn't.
Are they mostly a pill form, or
Yeah,
can they
these,
buy it, be
tablet
bought at the
Dianabol.
nutrition stores sometimes?
Yeah, they
Or-
can't be bought,
No.
the real steroids cannot be bought in a nutrition store. It's prescription item.
Some of them do come liquid form for injection, but
Yeah,
I don't think you're gonna see a lot of that among high school kids.
The other use that wasn't talked about was inhalants, which is very
Right.
popular in middle school, and we do have information, I don't know if the panel wants to address it, but it's very, very prevalent in middle school age students.
Not just markers in high school.
Like magic markers. Yeah, it can be almost anything, a household product, so it's not even illegal things.
Solvents. Interestingly, we used to see more in rural areas than suburban and urban areas.
Hardware stores, hobby shop.
I mean, he had one girl died about a year and a half ago, I think it was. She was inhaling propane. I mean, I don't know, but that's what they'll inhale almost anything.
We've also seen a drug that we never saw before called Special K or Special Ketamine, which is cat anesthesia. That popped up in Billerica, it popped up in Air. I haven't seen it in this area, but it's
I
certainly
have,
close.
we've seen it in Malden and Woburn recently.
Ecstasy too.
Bob, I have a question on methamphetamines. I understand from what Rich said earlier that it's pretty much a drug of choice of the drug out on the West Coast, and maybe it's moving east. But why does methamphetamine? What does it do to the central nervous system that makes it so addictive? And
Well, it's a stimulant, Tom. It is very psychologically addicting and it is physically addicting. causes increases in blood pressure, lets you party all night. Probably they mix it with other things that help you come down from the jitters and the high. They'll probably mix it with marijuana, possibly. Any Valium, anything like that to kind of like even off. But basically, it's probably a good feeling, gives you a lot of energy, thinks you can run all day.
Relatively cheap. It's like the crystal meth is like a synthetic cocaine. Short money.
Made easily.
Yes.
Methamphetamine was actually on the market, prescription, for a long time under the name Desoxyn. And it was used, some people use it for narcolepsy, so they did have a medicinal use. It is off the market.
The other thing with cocaine that we're finding out in some research is that people who use cocaine, it sort of sets a memory in their brain. So that even say if you were a cocaine user and at one point you're doing some cocaine or listening to some record, you could be 5 years down the road and hear that record and you're going to have an instant memory and a craving for cocaine. This sort of gets mapped in your brain.
Shows you how old he is, listening to records.
One of those.
Are there any more questions? I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight, and you're certainly welcome to come up and ask questions of the panel after, and again, help yourself to any of the materials that are here, and there's still coffee and goodies in the back, so help yourself.
This was a real good brochure with more over there.
Judy,